A new psychoactive substances bill published today is aiming to outlaw all drugs which are currently legal. It will create a blanket ban to stop them being produced, distributed and sold. So we're asking, should all legal highs be banned? Well, joining me now to discuss this are Ed Boyd, Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice, which is an independent think tank, and Charlotte Bowyer from the Libertarian and Free Market campaign body, the Adam Smith Institute. Thanks to both of you for joining us this morning. But before we get started, though, a reminder that you too can join the debate. You can tweet us at Sky News, including the hashtag Sky Debate, text on 84501, or email news@sky.com. Let us know what you think, or if there's any points you want to put to our guests here, we'll read some of your comments out as we go along. So first of all, I can start with you, Charlotte Bowyer. First of all, a lot of people would say that this ban is long overdue. More and more people are being harmed or even dying from these drugs. About time we had a blanket ban just to end this problem once and for all.
Well, the main reason that we have a problem with legal highs is because of the current prohibition system. By far, the majority of legal highs are actually mimicking traditionally outlawed drugs such as cannabis, ecstasy and coke. And this demand is being driven by either the fact that it's readily available and people are looking for a high and they can get it, or because of the falling purity in street drugs. And so, yeah, legal highs are actually very dangerous and very unsafe, but the reason that they are provided is because of this outlawing system. Now, the ban that is being proposed is actually incredibly strained and very far-reaching and very heavy-handed, because what it's actually doing is banning anything which has any psychoactive effect whatsoever on your body, and that includes huge amounts of things like caffeine, alcohol, tobacco. And so what the government has to do is basically ban absolutely everything and then write in exceptions for all the everyday things that we like to use. And this is a very strange way of doing law. Instead of having law which prohibits certain items, it's saying that everything is prohibited until the state says that it's acceptable for us to do it. And I think that's actually a very dangerous tactic to use.
If I can bring in Ed Boyd here, there's 2 points that Charlotte raises. If I can just address the first one first. She's saying that if there aren't legal highs, then people will find other ways of getting high, possibly more dangerous ways.
Well, what we've seen in this country from research over the last few years and areas where they've made drugs more freely available is actually if you restrict the number of drugs that are available, it can reduce use, it can reduce levels of addiction and prevent people from falling into that and ruining their lives, their families' lives and their communities as well. So I'm not sure I agree with that side of thing. And on the slight scaremongering side of things, we heard there, this is disproportionate. I'm not sure it's disproportionate when you have 100 deaths linked to legal highs every single year, that number going up and up. And one of the big reasons why this is happening is loads of people are taking legal highs thinking that they're safe, thinking that they're fine, because you can buy them on the high street alongside the sweet shop just as easily. And very little has been done up till now to try and change this. So, we should be welcoming this legislation in.
And what about the point that Charlotte makes about a blanket ban being too widespread?
She said, as she explained that, this excludes tobacco, it excludes alcohol, all the exemptions that would be necessary for things we do not think should be included within this important health-based pharmaceutical drugs as well, have been excluded from this. So really this only goes to show that this is such an important thing that this legislation is being brought in. And one of the things we shouldn't forget is this isn't a trial that we're doing in this country. This is a tried and tested way of tackling the menace of legal highs in this country. It was tried last Parliament by the Irish and had a phenomenal effect, reducing the number of legal high head shops from over 100 to fewer than 10. And we've heard from doctors in our research saying this has massively reduced the admissions to hospital as a result of legal high injuries and accidents. So we should really be welcoming this today.
So, Charlotte, that answers your point, doesn't it? Because Ed is there pointing to the example of Ireland, where the number of cases of people becoming sick from using these legal highs has actually gone down, no rise in people becoming ill from using illegal highs. So the UK is looking at what's happened in Ireland, and it's worked very effectively there. A lot of the head shops have now closed.
They have closed, but actually this legislation leaves open the possibility of new innovative ways of people bringing these synthetic chemicals to market. For example, the ban has to exclude food, so it's plausible perhaps that research chemicals will start finding their way into things like brownies and start consuming in the same way that we do hash brownies. There's also evidence from Ireland that these legal highs are actually making their way onto the illegal market and are actually starting to contaminate drugs, like traditional drugs like cocaine and ecstasy. There's evidence of that with things like methadone. When that was banned, it's now sneaking its way into other substances which people are buying. And now when you've got this huge mix of things which are prohibited, it makes street drugs far more dangerous. And actually, if you want to talk about harm prevention, you need a new model, something that maybe legalises most drugs and restricts the quality, restricts the purity, and has it on a very safe use-by-user basis, which actually allows people to take things which are safe, because legal highs aren't safe, and I think we all agree on that. And what we want to do is have a drugs policy which minimises the harm that's caused to people and to society. And one of the best ways to do that is decriminalisation. And evidence from Portugal shows that when they decriminalised drugs, the amount of deaths that they had, I think, fell over a decade from something like 86 a year to 16. The number of people contracting HIV from intravenous drug use plummeted as well, from 1,000 to something like 50. So there are very clear, obvious ways of showing that decriminalisation and strict control is actually a far better way of making sure that the population as a whole is safe, as opposed to a blanket ban on everything, which causes a lot of uncertainty and is only guaranteed to make the black market more dangerous.
What would you say to that, Ed Boyd? Decriminalisation instead of just a blanket ban?
Well, the evidence that was pointed to there from Portugal is slightly misguided, because Portugal did two things at the same time. Yes, it decriminalised to some extent the drugs in that country, but it also hugely invested in making sure that they had effective treatment for those who are suffering with addictions to illegal drugs. And I would posit actually that the investment in helping people tackle their deep-seated crack cocaine, heroin addictions was one of the most effective things that they could have done. It's one thing this country should invest in more, we believe, is making sure there's good residential rehab for those who have become addicted to illegal drugs. That doesn't take into account that side of things. And on the decriminalisation side, there was a poll a couple of years ago which showed around just under a third of young people who had never taken any drugs before would consider taking a drug if it was decriminalised. And I think the last thing we need at the moment is a policy that leads to more people taking drugs, more people becoming in, especially at a time when our addiction services are not as good as they should be.
What would you say to that, Charlotte? You would encourage more people to take drugs if you decriminalise them?
I don't think that's actually necessarily true. Again, in Portugal, drug use has actually fallen, particularly among key groups like the 16 to 24-year-olds. In Amsterdam,
UK, though, if you look at the current situation right now, before this new law came in, you wouldn't say that the laws we had in place were working, because I think the government had banned something like 500 new drugs, but as fast as they banned them, new ones were appearing with new unknown ingredients, which could possibly be more dangerous than the ones that were before.
Absolutely, and that's a direct result of the prohibition system. And the reason that these are coming onto board is because people can't have things like cannabis, and they can't. And again, even when you're buying cannabis, it's very hard to get things which aren't super strength skunk. The reason these things are coming to market is because there's simply a demand for them, and we have to look at that. And it's absolutely right when we talk about needing to have healthcare systems and really good things in place to protect people. For example, in Colorado, where they've legalized marijuana, they're using most of that tax intake to provide treatment systems for teenage children, and all that money being taken in tax is being ploughed straight into reducing harms. And that's the kind of system which we could use. And Ed says he's right that our system is currently underfunded. But actually, decriminalisation and taxation is one of the most effective ways we can create the money and have a system in place which protects people.
I mean, Ed Boyd, that's an interesting point. I mean, this comes at a time, this blanket ban here, when other countries, US states, are moving towards legalising cannabis. Should we be looking at allowing drugs like ecstasy, cannabis, to be more available, but with rigorous controls?
Well, we, as an organisation, we have 350 voluntary organisations and charities who are working on the front line tackling poverty, many of them helping people tackle drug addictions through to helping to get them into work. And as this question sort of bubbled up, we asked them, what do you think we should be campaigning for? What came back was a resounding no, please do not do this. There was I think just over two-thirds said that they were against any sort of liberalisation of current drug laws. And the reasons that they gave to us in our survey and in follow-up interviews was that they worried it would increase use, but beyond that as well, as it would increase use, as well as creating addiction. Lots of charities trying to get people into work said, look, it's so much more difficult trying to get someone into work if they're regularly taking cannabis. It was having issues with people developing depression and other mental health difficulties as well. So our viewpoint is really reflecting what frontline poverty-fighting charities are saying when we say we think this would be a bad thing for the poorest communities around the country and therefore something we shouldn't consider doing.
And yet, Charlotte, many people do use these drugs, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. It's a sort of a fact of life that people do use drugs, and the whole explosion in legal highs shows that if you prohibit something and people are looking for a high, then they're going to take it and they're going to take these risks and do it. And it's interesting you talk about poverty, because one of the biggest effects of a sort of prohibition outlawing system is that you marginalise people who take drugs, people who deal with drugs, and actually you reduce their chances. If they're caught and they're cautioned or they have like a prison sentence, then they're much less likely to get into employment. They're much less likely to be a contributing member of society. And what you can do again when drugs are legalised is you can reduce the potency of them. And there was a study out which showed that there is a link with psychosis and super-strength skunk. But the same study showed actually that people who smoked less strong strains of marijuana didn't have this effect. And that's the kind of thing that we can actually allow and encourage in a system where a debate about drugs is open, use of drug is open, and we're allowed to experiment and actually create goods which consumers want, which are safe.
Well, we'll have to leave the debate for now, but Charlotte Bowyer and Ed Boyd, thank you both very much.